Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for settling in to the webinar this morning. We appreciate your time. Spend the next hour with us talking about Copilot. This will be a 101 session, but again, we thank you for the time. We're working with our friends at Pax8 to deliver this message on Microsoft Copilot. We'll give everybody just a minute or two, but just some quick housekeeping. So you can utilize the Q&A feature if you would want. If you want to ask some questions throughout the webinar, we'll either type the answer in the chat or we will answer them at the end of the webinar. So feel free to utilize that. If you want to share this webinar afterwards with any of your coworkers, friends, family, this will be recorded and added to our YouTube channel, Choice Solutions YouTube channel. And then at the end of this webinar, if you do want a call to action with us or a next step, possibly a Copilot readiness assessment, we do have a couple 4-question quick survey. It'll take you about 30 seconds or less to fill out. So we'd appreciate you doing that. It'll auto-populate in the browser at the conclusion of the webinar. So it's 10 o'clock Central on the dot. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things over to Brian Steinloggy with Choice Solutions.
Hey, thanks, Ellie, and welcome everybody. To the customers on the call, thank you guys for your continued partnership and the opportunity to work alongside you as you serve your customers for maybe a new prospect who's just getting introduced to Choice. I want to give just a quick high level who we are and why you might care. And like I said, and then we'll get into the meat of the matter here today. But one second, let me get this going here. Who's Choice? Choice is originally, at least the company that Choice is, was originally founded back in 1986 by Jim Steinluggy, President and CEO. And what originally was on doing the right thing and treating others like you want to be treated, and really trying to bring that basically Midwestern values and how to engage and to work with emerging technologies. And so we got a dedicated and driven team that love partnering with organizations to empower and leverage next generation technology. So here's a picture of our team from all across the states. Here's where we serve. So even though we have team members primarily in the Midwest and the Southeast, however, we have done businesses because of our skill and expertise all across the country. And so like I said, it's a matter of finding the right opportunity, the right organizations that we can bring value to. We're really big about making sure that we're a good fit and where we can bring value before we engage. And so, like I said, that's got a chance to over the last, I think, 5 years, 750 customers across those 46 states. So if you're one of those 750, we thank you for that opportunity. What is the user experience in the hybrid cloud? What do you guys do? And so really it's a matter of partnering with organizations. The users all want, a consistent high speed anywhere access solution that's secure. Ironically, on the turn side of that, businesses want to attract and retain key talent. They want to make sure that they can deliver that anywhere access, but most importantly, they got to do it in a secure manner. And so it's partnering with them, bringing solutions forward to evaluate what technologies might be able to help them and move them forward. Everybody that we engage with, everybody's on a different part of this cloud journey. And so some of them, this might be your foray. You may have just started looking at M365. Some of you have already deployed M365, already done the maybe a unified communication platform with your phones and all that stuff in the cloud. You might even have applications in Amazon or Azure. Or this might be, like I said, you're just putting your toe in the water. But the truth of the matter is that with just standard on-prem, complex three-tier architecture no longer is being able to deliver the best experience. And so we try to come alongside organizations and evaluate on that hybrid cloud journey, how can we bring some of those emerging technologies that might be able to deliver that app or deliver that platform in a more secure and consistent manner in a more price-effective model. What do we do? So working with organizations on technology acquisition. So whether that's from an evaluation standpoint, whether it's a new backup solution, or they're looking at business continuity, disaster recovery, whether they're looking at it in overall, whether we move our whole infrastructure to the cloud, we'll help them evaluate whether they want to bring that back on-prem in a colo or a private cloud in a colo, or whether they do want to look at moving some workloads into a platform like GCP, Azure, or Amazon. And so working alongside them there and evaluating the best cost options. The other thing is that we have basically a high-end consultancy practice with advisory services that we do design, architecture, deployment support on large projects. And so we can come alongside and see where there's some gaps in service delivery models. But then there's between the acquisition of the product and the delivery of the product, there's also the ongoing support. And that's where we look at our managed service model. It's really finding where there might be a fragment, whether it's you currently are understaffed in a certain area or there's certain part of your staff, you like that's a level of expertise that we've struggled to maintain. And so we can bring our team, our tools, and our technologies alongside you and wrap that into a OpEx model, like as a managed service, and our team can manage that for you. Whether that's just the care and feeding and the infrastructure, whether that's the business continuity, disaster recovery, and backup, or whether that's the whole overall infrastructure. And so we just, like I said, come meet you where you're at, figure out how we could partner and help. And so, like I said, we offer people all along that gamut of services. What we've been told time and time again is this people are just looking for a trusted partner. Like I said, when you're working with our team, it's not unheard of. Some of our engineering talent's been with us for 20 plus years, 15 plus years, 13 plus years. And a lot of that attributes to once again, our culture and back to our vision, the values of our CEO is doing the right thing and treating others like you want to be treated, is that we allow those team members to make sure that they work alongside and bring in the right solutions to customers. And they really like that because that's what they're really good at. And so, like I said, there's a proven track record. They're genuine. They want to help people in a consultative manner. And so, this is what organizations keep telling us time and time again. What they're looking for is that trusted partner. Here's some of the strategic partners that we have a chance to work with currently. Like I said, from Citrix, Nutanix, Microsoft, ControlUp, iGel. If you're not familiar with any of those, we'd love to have that conversation. Or if you are, you're not satisfied with who you're currently working with, once again, we value partnership and we're not trying to create discontentment. But if they're not delivering the value that you believe that you should be getting with that purchase, then please reach out to your choice account manager. And so I'm getting ready to stop my share. And I just wanted to thank basically Austin from Pax 8 coming alongside here. When we talk about that cloud journey, I mean, today is nothing bigger. I mean, this isn't a technology when we start talking about Copilot. This isn't a, hey, let's go do a, hold my beer and go do a cannonball in the deep end. This is not a question of if, this is just a question of when your organization is going to employ this technology. And so this is a come alongside a crawl, walk, run and help you engage it. So I know Austin's going to share a lot of that from a how you can approach this technology as long with one of our security managers, Chris Watson's here to provide that introspect and that perspective as well. So both Austin and Chris, thank you guys for joining and thanks for working alongside the team today.
Thanks for having me. For anybody in the audience, quick call out. If you're not familiar with Microsoft as a company, I want to know who you are. You have an interesting life. That is the Chris. There we go. All right.
I may have denied knowing them this past weekend.
Well, that's a different thing.
Yep.
But I appreciate everybody having me on. Can you see my screen?
Oh yeah.
Perfect. And we are seeing the table of contents of the slide deck, correct?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Zoom didn't give me the little outline around it, so I just wanted to double check you weren't staring at my team's calendar. But I appreciate you guys having me on. Copilot and just generative AI in general, I think over the past year has really weaseled its way into the forefront of the cultural zeitgeist. I had a very interesting experience over Thanksgiving where my grandmother, and bless her heart, she's 92. She was talking to me about her concerns about this emerging technology called A1. She'd only ever seen it written, so I couldn't hold it against her. But just to put it in perspective of like how permeating this technology is, my grandma and all of her friends are cursorily aware of it. And so that really tells me that this solution, this product, this technology is here to stay. And so my friends over at Choice wanted me to come in and give you guys a quick presentation to help get you more familiar with generative AI, but also Copilot specifically. So diving right in, just wanted to review the agenda with you. So we're going to have three primary components here. Kind of one is going to just be getting to know Copilot. What is it? How does it work? What are the requirements? What are the risks? Then we move into Copilot readiness. Okay, Austin, I am interested in this. What do I actually need to do, and how do I need to think about getting ready for this new technology? And then lastly, adoption. What should we do today if we wanted to take action and begin our AI readiness journey? So without any further ado, what is Copilot? Microsoft is really good at naming things. I'm sure we've all noticed over the years. And Copilot and AI is no different. And so when a lot of people think about Copilot, they are thinking about a specific product. That could be Copilot for 365, that could be Copilot for sales, that could be Copilot Studio. But at the forefront or at the core of Copilot, Copilot is really just a brand name. It is Microsoft's brand name that represents their suite of large language model AI-based products. And so I always find it's helpful to understand that Copilot itself is a name, it's a brand name, and it represents the suite of products that allow users to interact with data via human language. That's all it is at its core. And so here on this diagram, we've got Copilot logo in the center. And then the next wheel out is the area of Microsoft that Copilot is going to integrate with. And then at the very edge of this wheel, we see all the individual products that Copilot has an integration with. And so when we're thinking about Copilot, we're really just thinking about a new way for users to interact with data. And the data source is going to ultimately determine the Copilot product. So the ones that we're going to be talking about most today are going to be Copilot for 365 and Copilot for web. Those two go hand in hand together. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention that there are Copilots that you can get within Dynamics. There's Copilot for service, Copilot for sales that allow you to integrate with Dynamics environments. There's Security Copilot, which is much more of an administrative tool set that allows you to harness the power of generative AI to ask questions about your security environment, give some feedback and some thoughts, as well as to analyze telemetry data. And then lastly, there's Copilot Studio, which is, think about it as create your own instance of a Copilot chatbot where you get to determine the data set. And so before we move on, I did just want to make sure we review Copilot, large language model, AI-based products. The data set that we're interacting with determines the product. And so moving on, we've got Copilot for 365. When anybody is thinking about Copilot, this is probably the product we're thinking about, where we can, as users, interact with the data in the Microsoft environment across SharePoint, across OneDrive, across Teams, across Exchange, and within the individual applications to analyze, aggregate, and transform data. While alternatively, we have Copilot for the web, which is included in all Microsoft 365 bundled licensing. If you've got an M365 license that gives you email and applications for one fixed cost, you've got Copilot for the web. This represents Microsoft's large language model AI product that leverages the known internet as the data set. And so one key distinction I want to try to make right here is when we are asking questions or looking for insights about information that we have in our environment, we're going to use Copilot for 365. When we're asking questions that can't be found, the answers are not in Teams, they're not in SharePoint, they're not in your inbox, they're not anywhere in your environment, we're going to go to Copilot for the web. And so that is Copilot in a nutshell, a suite of large language model generative AI products that allow users to interact with data via human language, and the data set that the user is interacting with determines the product that the user will be using within the Copilot product sphere. Any questions before we move on? I do have the chat open up and not seeing anything, so we will move right along. So how does this all work? To explain how Copilot for 365 works, I like this diagram here. I stole it from Microsoft because this is the only diagram and thing that I've found online that really helps understand how Copilot for 365 works to the non-technical level. And so before we dive in and explain all of this diagram, it is good to set some additional context, which is how did we get here? The way that we got here, i.e. me being on a webinar, talking to you about Microsoft Copilot. Really started way back in 2019 when OpenAI piqued the interest of Microsoft's CEO Satya. And Microsoft had been really lying in wait for the better part of a decade, watching the market, looking for emerging technologies, trying to figure out what's going to be the next big thing, what's going to be our next big bet. And so turns out in 2015, OpenAI was founded as a nonprofit organization to try to solve the challenge of what is the new iteration of AI. And so OpenAI throughout 2019, 2020, 2021 did a ton of research and development. And what they came out with was ChatGPT. I'm sure at this point, everybody on the call has at least heard of or maybe even played around with ChatGPT. That is OpenAI's large language model product. Microsoft, back in 2019, saw what OpenAI was doing, and Satya said, this is the next thing. This is where we're going to place the biggest bet as a company we've ever placed on a technology. And they pledged $40 billion to OpenAI and acquired 49% of their for-profit side of the business. Told you, really big bet. And so what Microsoft got for that 40 billion investment is the ability to license OpenAI's ChatGPT source code and repurpose it to make their own instance of the product that's going to be specific for the commercial instance. And so I like starting and providing that context because when we think about how Copilot works, it's fundamental that we first understand that the large language model, which is OpenAI's ChatGPT, that Microsoft has taken the code and thrown it in their own private data centers. We call Microsoft's private cloud Azure, and hence we have Azure OpenAI. So the large language model, which right now is ChatGPT 4 Turbo, is currently sitting in a Microsoft data center, doing its thing, computing all day, all night. Independent of if we have a license, independent of if we're using it, that's just here sitting out in the cloud. And so when we buy the $360 per user per year license and we assign it to a user, all we're doing is we're giving ourselves access to the large language model in the cloud by bringing a Copilot agent into the tenancy. So at no point are we taking a massive large language model and moving it into your environment. That would just be feasibly impossible. And that's some of the concern that I feel that I hear a lot of times with business owners and customers saying, I'm interested in taking advantage of Copilot, but I'm concerned about just releasing an AI in my environment without any checks and balances. And so first and foremost, you wouldn't even be doing that. And so when we buy the $360 license, we're getting this Copilot agent that can communicate with the large language model. And before we can do anything functional with it, the first thing Copilot has to do, or the agent has to do, is catalog and index all of the data in your Microsoft environment that that user has access to. And we do that via the Microsoft Graph, and it's called leveraging the semantic index. This is taking all of the static data, whether it's emails, whether it's Teams meetings, Teams transcripts, documents in SharePoint, documents in OneDrive, and all the ancillary data that might be floating around your environment. It takes it in the graph and turns it into a functional, relatable, searchable database. And when a user opens up one of their applications, whether it's the Edge browser to use the most global instance of Copilot, the Word browser, or the Word app, Teams, PowerPoint, Outlook, Excel, and they provide a prompt, they'll do so in just human language, not in code. So just asking for a thing in human language. Copilot will then take that human language prompt and it will pre-process it via a process called grounding. The way that I think about this is it takes your human language and it converts it to the code that is readable by the large language model. It then finds all the necessary pieces of data in your environment that are requisite for responding to the user prompt, and then takes an alphanumeric representation of your data, not the data itself, an alphanumeric representation of the data. That is encrypted and goes out to the large language model, where the large language model does its processing, generates a response, it's post-processed, and then delivered back to the human in human language. This entire process happens in real time, and everything on this side right here, you'll notice this is called the Microsoft Trust Boundary. This represents the division between the data in your tenant and the interaction with the large language model. Everything from this side over, once Microsoft returns your response, it wipes and deletes the memory. So there is no running list of prompts on the back end that Microsoft can look at and search and do anything with. There is no opportunity for Microsoft to leverage your search data, your queries, to train the model globally. And your data, again, never leaves the Microsoft environment. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about that, just because so many concerns that have come up to me over the months of talking about Copilot and presenting to partners and their customers has been centered around who has my data, what is my data being used for, is Microsoft doing anything with my data, and are they profiting off of my data in any way other than allowing me to access it and use it with this license? And the answer to all of those questions are, who has your data? You do, as the user and the administrators. Microsoft technically houses your data, but they do that already today. And the addition of Copilot doesn't give them any additional access. So that's important to know. So fundamentally, who has your data? You do. What is my data being used for? Whatever it is that you are leveraging Copilot to use it for, to respond to a prompt. Microsoft is not doing anything with your data once it is returned to you, i.e. because they physically can't. They built that process, they built that into the workflow, into the process to mitigate anybody from being able to intercept your information, log it, and do anything with it. And so just by the way that Microsoft has architected all of this, they have intentionally done so to mitigate a lot of the security and compliance risks, at least from the Microsoft side. Now, because this works this way, Copilot is going to act as an extension of the user. And so anything they ask for here, if they have access to it via group membership, or it's been shared with them, or it's just accessible to the entire company, Copilot doesn't know that they shouldn't have access to it because they inherently do. And so anything that a user has access to that they ask for, Copilot has the capability to bring that back to them. And so while that's an incredibly powerful tool that we can harness to be, if nothing else, the most efficient and strongest e-discovery solution that the world has ever seen, but more importantly, it allows us to find information, aggregate information, analyze information, and then either use that analyzed information to inform a decision or generate new content. And while that's incredibly powerful, it does open up some potential risk. And so did want to take a quick second to just touch on what are the prerequisites for leveraging Copilot. When I first made this slide deck, there were a lot less options on this list. Honestly, Microsoft has taken the decision to cast a wide net with who as a user base is eligible for Copilot based on their Microsoft licensing. And so any license that we see here, from a business basic to an M365E5 license, is technically eligible to leverage Copilot. However, when we dig into the risks here in a bit, we might feel a little different towards the end about what licensing we're going to feel comfortable providing our users that are also going to have Copilot. But that's the licensing side. And then on the alternative side of the requirements is there's got to be a data conversation. Copilot and generative AI in general is only going to be as valuable of a tool as the data it has access to. And so as we're evaluating Copilot and generative AI, we need to understand where is the important data that we're hoping to leverage for Copilot. because Copilot can only access data that's in the Microsoft environment, i.e. in your tenant, or data that has been actively integrated into your Microsoft environment via a Power Platform premium connector. So is the data accessible to Copilot? Is primary question. Secondary question there is, how much of that data is reliable? A recent poll beginning of this year showed that roughly 75% of companies didn't trust their own data. We want to have a good understanding of how much of the data in our environment that's important to us is clean and good data versus stale and out of date, because we want to have as strong of a signal and reduce the noise as humanly possible. And then lastly is, if Copilot can access the data and we're certain that that data is clean, do the right users have access to that data? Because again, Copilot is only going to have access to the data that a user implicitly does. And the way that I think about that is, if a user can navigate the GUI to go access a thing, Copilot will pull that back for them instantaneously. And so that opens up the question of, do we have appropriate data sharing and appropriate data access in our environment? And so those are the requirements. We just need a bundled M365 license, as well as some data that we're hoping to leverage for Copilot. Ideally, the data is in the Microsoft environment and or actively connected via connector. That data is clean and the correct users have access to that data. Any questions before we move on? All right, so moving into the risks. Might already start to have some come to mind, since we now know that Copilot is a tool that allows users to interact with data via human language, and that Copilot for Work will allow a user to access and interact with data that they implicitly have access to. That in and of itself is going to open up some risk. Now, luckily, this is not going to introduce any net new or brand new risk that we've never had to deal with. We've no idea what to do with. What it actually does is it just shines a magnifying glass on some existing risks that are already important and we need to try to mitigate. First and foremost, external threats, right? People that are outside of your organization that are trying to get in to either deploy a payload or steal information. Well, if we now understand how Copilot works and that it allows a user to access and pull any information in the environment that they do have access to, we now have to run the thought experiment of, what happens if a user has access to sensitive information and they are breached? It's not going to be a good day. So there are going to be identity and security, this identity security, email security, endpoint security, mitigation tactics that we're going to want to put in place to ensure that when a user does have Copilot and is logging in and accessing any data in the system, especially sensitive data, that we are darn near certain that that user is who they say they are and they have the appropriate level of access such that they can be productive without taking on any additional risk. Which then brings us to the next side of that, which is insider threats. People internal to the organization accidentally seeing something that they shouldn't have access to, or maliciously searching and trying to find information and then do something nefarious with it. The second, we're going to chalk that up to like good hiring, firing practices and company culture. Can't help that much with that. But as far as the accidental exposure, that's something that matters and that's something that we can mitigate against. And so we're going to get into some of the ways that we can start thinking about solving and mitigating these risks, but those are the two that are going to be top of mind. How do we make sure that users that have Copilot are the only users that are able to get into the environment, i.e. they're not being breached? And secondarily, users that have Copilot only have the appropriate level of access, not too much to do any data risks or data exposures, and not too little that they're not productive. which moves us right into readiness. So how do we go about thinking about solving these challenges? Copilot readiness is not going to necessarily be a end goal result. It's more of a framework for thinking that requires ongoing maintenance as well as ongoing compliance. So Copilot readiness is definitely something we start. It's an area where we get to a good place at, but it's not something that really has a true endpoint on it, because as we'll see, there is going to be some compliance factors and just ongoing maintenance. So number one is going to be data management. Some levers that we're going to want to pull on here are data governance. Who has access to what and why? Data orchestration. Where is data currently? Is it accessible to Copilot? Do we need to set up any coordinating flows of data from source to source to give it access? And is that efficient? And then data estate modernization and migration. This is really referring to legacy older data sets that have valuable information in them that we need to modernize and either get into the cloud, get into Dynamics, or figure out to an intermediary step such that Copilot can access that data and be unleashed upon it. So there's a data management component. And then there is an identity and access management component. Paxi has worked with a number of cybersecurity professionals in the field to identify a handful of CIS controls that, when implemented, allow us to at least put the minimum necessary safeguards in place. And so that's going to be the basic controls, CIS 1 through 6, CIS 7 through 16, and CIS 17 through 20. All of these really tie in together to ensure that users have the correct level of access, they have the correct level of security in place, and there is an ongoing maintenance of who has access, and the training and development to ensure that everybody stays sharp. Those are the policies that we generally recommend companies start working on towards improving their identity and access posture. And so those have been some pretty abstract concepts, to say the least. And so I put together this little graph here that I think really helps just make this a little bit more simpler and puts it in at least to some terms of some licensing for us. So on the x-axis, we have data, and we're looking at the level of data a particular user has access to in a given environment. On the left-hand side, we have zero access, i.e. an inert account. And to the far right, we have the full access / access to the most sensitive things. So global admins right over here, access to everything in the environment / anybody in your organization that has access to information that if it's 8 a.m. on a Monday morning and we got an email or a phone call or a text message saying, hey, this person's been hacked and they're down, how bad of a day that is for you. If it's a really, really bad day, that person is on this list. And so from no access to the most access / access to the most sensitive mission critical data in the environment, juxtaposed against the identity protection. Here at the bottom, that's going to be just a username and password. Up here at the top is going to represent all of the identity security policies that Microsoft has in place that we can take advantage of to ensure a user is who they say they are. And so the way that I think about how do we solve at least the identity versus the access side is we want to think about who in the environment has the most access or access to the most sensitive information. And we're going to want to give them a license that provides intra ID plan 2. This is because we are going to be able to take advantage of risk-based conditional access policies, SSO, privileged identity management, access reviews, risk-based conditional access as well, or I already said risk-based conditional access, as well as automated remediation on risky logins, all really good things that allow us as administrators and IT professionals to ensure that users who have sensitive access to sensitive information are locked down on the identity as much as we possibly can because the only alternative is to remove their access to the sensitive information. And if we can't remove access to sensitive data, we have to harden those users' environments such that they're the only ones that can get in. And then as we work down the data access map to about here, where we no longer have access to any sensitive information, this is mainly public information, or just, it's private company information, but if it did end up getting leaked, it's not the end of the world. We don't want to go all the way to no security here, which is a username and password, but we will want to leverage at least an license that provides intra ID plan 1, so we can take advantage of just static conditional access policies, multi-factor authentication, enterprise SSO, and the ability to ensure that all users who have access to Copilot have at least the minimum identity security policies in place, while everybody that has access to more sensitive information is getting the intra ID plan 2 license. And then once we've kind of mapped that out, we just codify these people's access via security group membership, information barriers, and information protection policies to ensure that at the end of the day, every user who has access to sensitive information are secure on the identity side, as well as they are the only people that can access that sensitive information. Everybody else has the more basic identity protection policies in place, and they can only access the information that's important to them, and they cannot access any of this information over here. And we, again, codify all of that via group policy, security group policy, security group membership, information protection, and information barriers. Whew. All right. And so as we start to think about how do we want to leverage Copilot and who we should probably be thinking about on the identity and versus the data access management side of things, and trying to figure out just what it is we hope to use Copilot for and how we're going to go about doing that. This flow chart really articulates well a good workflow for figuring out how to do this. And so we want to start here in the upper left-hand corner with what is the business outcome, i.e., what are we hoping to leverage Copilot for? A really good example of this is I would like to leverage Copilot such that within 6 months of implementation, I can reduce the administrative overhead by my sales team up to by 25%. Perfect. Once we have our first outcome, we then need to identify who are the primary users and what systems do they interface with. Well, for my business outcome here, reduce the sales staff administrative overhead by 50% after 6 months of launching. Well, primary interface is going to be my sales staff. What systems do we interface with? That's going to be Microsoft 365 as well as Salesforce CRM. Perfect. Now we move into what are the data sources and permissions required such that the primary users can achieve this business outcome. And so for my example, we're going to be talking about email data, Teams meeting transcript data, data that is in SharePoint, and then data that's in my CRM. All right. And so what data that I just listed is already in my tenant? That's going to be all the Microsoft stuff. The one thing that's not in Microsoft is our CRM data. So we're not going to likely migrate to Dynamics 365 Sales Enterprise, as much as I'd love that. So we're going to have to look at, can we connect that data? And we can. Microsoft Copilot for Sales allows a user with Copilot and Salesforce to have an additional add-on that allows Copilot to integrate with Salesforce. Great. And then lastly, output data and permissions required. Where am I going to interact with the customer or the partner? How am I going to achieve this business outcome? Well, there's going to be an email component, some OneDrive component, a SharePoint component, a Teams component. And then for me, this other is going to be Salesforce CRM. And so when we're thinking about trying to figure out where do we start, it's really helpful to go through this exercise with a bunch of the different business unit leaders in your organization to try to identify across a number of different roles, across a number of different departments in your organization, 2 to 3 solid business outcomes that we're trying to achieve with Copilot, walk through this conversation, trying to figure out which users, where's the data set, what are the output and the permissions required. And doing this will give you a great blueprint starting point for who should we license with Copilot first, what data are we going to be looking at to make sure they have access to, and what they shouldn't have access to. Is that data sensitive enough that we want to merit enhanced identity security? And then what do we need to do on any external data sources or output required such that we can achieve this positive business outcome leveraging Copilot? And so I did want to take a quick moment. We know at the very while ago, we talked about the licensing requirements, and Microsoft casts a wide net now. So it's business basic, business standard, business premium, E1, E3, E5, M365, E3, M365, E5. Those are all eligible to utilize Copilot. However, now that we know how it works, i.e. it allows a user to interact with data that they have access to via human language, pulling down any information, aggregating and analyzing it to do whatever they wish with it, as well as that it will pull that information to any user that asks for it. There's some risk in there. And so my general recommendation is, if we're considering Copilot, we're going to want to stick to one of these 3 licenses for the users that are going to have Copilot. Namely because these 3 licenses, Business Premium, M365 E3, and M365 E5, give you as administrators and business owners the ability to ensure that all users that have Copilot have the necessary identity, email, inbox, endpoint protections in place, as well as the solutions to codify the data and access management and data loss prevention policies. And the way that I would think about who should get which license is starting at the most access / most sensitive access in the environment, or what I would consider a high risk, high value target. We're going to probably want to license those individuals with the M365 E5, because if they were to be breached, the level of access that they have could be very detrimental to the organization with any data exposures. And we're going to want to just throw everything we have at them. If not the M365 E5, maybe the M365 E3 plus some of the E5 security components. But once we've covered our high risk, high value individuals, we then look at the business premium license for every other individual up to 300. Once we hit 300 users on business premium, that's where anybody between the individual contributor getting business premium and our high risk, high value targets in the organization on E5 get that M365 E3 license to provide the necessary identity and access components required to ensure that they can access Copilot and do so safely, not while mitigating all risk that we've talked about here today. And so actually this slide is a little outdated, so I'm just going to skip this one. Sorry about that. And so what can we do today? Step 1, I would say, is taking some time to think about, as business owners, as necessary stakeholders, what is our business's policy? What is our written policy on the appropriate use case of generative AI? What areas of the business do we allow generative AI to help and assist our users? What areas of the business do we actively prohibit it? What systems and solutions do we trust and encourage our employees to use / provide to them? What solutions do we actively block and prohibit? And then lastly, what are going to be the consequences for anybody found in violation of your generative AI appropriate use case policy? That would be step 1, is to at least start thinking about that. Beyond that, when we are talking about getting hands-on solution and beginning the meaningful work that is beginning the AI readiness, first and foremost, I would encourage people to start with Copilot for Web. As I had mentioned earlier, it's the same large language model, ChatGPT 4 Turbo. It's just that it allows you to ask questions of the known internet. It is a zero risk, zero cost way to deliver a large language model generative AI product to your end users that has Microsoft's backing on data protection and privacy that they have for their entire product suite. Next, if anybody is really interested on the applications of AI in Teams and we're not quite ready to start rolling out the $360 license to people, I would encourage people to start with Teams Premium. It's currently $7 per user per month, and it allows the at least basic Copilot AI integration to start seeing automated AI transcripts generate call notes for you. But once we have people leveraging at least Copilot for the web, and we have trained them up a little bit on how to use that product, we then want to start working with our friends here at Choice. And we want to start with a licensing review and a data readiness assessment. Once we've done that, that's going to reveal which data sets are sensitive and need to be protected and which users have access to those data sets. Choice is going to work with you to protect the users that have access to the sensitive data and lock down the data access map via security policy. And then they're going to be able to start deploying Copilot. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can go about this. You could try to do all the readiness and then flip the switch to give everybody Copilot at once. I wouldn't recommend it. It's going to be a very expensive project, both on the project time and just like, $360 licenses. Rather, I recommend doing this as a phased approach rollout where we identify 5 to 10 or 10 to 20 users, depending on the size of your organization, that are going to be phase one to receive Copilot. And we want these users to represent a cross section of the organization, not just one cohort leadership, not just individual contributors. It'd be good to have a person across a bunch of different teams, departments, and roles. And we're going to work with Choice to do the data and access management for those people first, license them with Copilot, provide them some training on how to use it. And then as they begin using it, you're going to work with Choice to identify phase two rollout, which is going to be the same, either 5 to 10 or 10 to 20. Data and access management, provide the licensing, some training. At this point, the people that were in phase one can now become the coaches, mentors, and champions internally for that team for the people in phase two. And then every other round of rollout, we're just going to double the cohort size. This is because the data and access management starts to become more standard operating procedure, and it doesn't need nearly as much time to work. And then the end goal there is we just keep doing phased rollouts until we get to the end goal, which is every user in the organization that can benefit from generative AI has generative AI and are able to use it safely without taking on any additional risk. And so call to actions here are going to be, again, Copilot for the web. Start playing with it. We all have access to it today. It's free. It's zero risk. It's included in your licensing. Reach out to your friends here at Choice Solutions to begin your data and AI readiness journey. And then me here at Pax8, I'm here to support my friends here at Choice for every step along the way. And I appreciate you guys for having me out again today to get to talk to your good audience about Copilot and generative AI. Hope this was a worthwhile venture for everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Austin. That was actually really insightful and kind of hit a lot of the points that discussions I have with both sides of the house, both technical and the business, when we talk about risk, but we also talk about a lot of us in the risk area don't want to be bleeding edge, but at the same time understand that our users are going to be there anyway. So yeah, really appreciate the information and sort of the macro view of the risk around how we manage it. But yeah, to echo what Austin said, we here at Choice would love to step in and have a conversation with you as to what that looks like in your environment, whether that's implementation, whether that's doing an assessment to see what your permission structure looks like. A lot of times, one of the things that Austin kind of hit on was while Copilot doesn't make its own permissions, it does it'll display what permissions you have, whether you like them or not. And that's the last thing you want is a surprise coming that way. So again, would love to continue this conversation with you. Get in touch with your account team, and we can set you up with the right partner and the right solution to sort of help you on this AI journey. The cheap plug is we also have conversations like this in a little less formal environment. We call it My Ties with IT Guys every second week of the month. So be sure to talk to your account team about that as well. That being said and done, I'll turn it over to Brian to close us out.
Hey, Austin, Chris, thank you guys. And to all the customers who joined, like I said, we kind of have two different ways we approach this on a small to medium space. We have one approach that we typically do, and then also two from a medium to large. Because, like I said, we had customers from all kinds, all across the country and all sizes of organization. So all things are not equal in how we approach this and the diligence that has to be expended. And so please, we will sit out from the marketing team a survey. And so part of that survey is that, yes, I would like to have additional information, and as the choice account manager can connect with the resources for that follow-up discussion. Because like I said, it isn't a question of if, it's just a question of when that you will utilize generative AI in your business. And we know that that pressure is probably being asked of you from your leadership right now. And so the goal is to get out in front of that. And once again, is that this isn't a cannonball in the deep end. This is a crawl, walk, run. And we'd rather find, like Austin said, whether it's on the web, and then find a safe use case on how we can start working with, whether it's your marketing department, where there's some areas that we can start putting our toe in the water here and start working through what does that mean for your organization and how can you leverage that to really make a difference in your business. Like I said, that's something that as an organization, we've really prided ourselves on helping customers embrace emerging tech, not bleeding tech, emerging tech. And that's our job, is having people like Chris Watson to help us pull back from that, where the bleeding edge is to the leading edge, to make sure that we're making safe recommendations on solutions, that we are fully aware of maybe the risk or the benefits, and helping you guys to be aware of those as you're approaching this. So when the survey comes out, please complete that. Give us feedback on that. We want to make sure that we're continuing to bring topics. If there's some other ones that you would like to hear on, or you'd like a follow-up conversation on, please include that in the email coming out from our marketing team. But if not, to the customers, thank you guys for your continued trust and partnership. For the prospects on here, thank you guys for your trust and giving us an hour to learn a little bit more about us and learning a little bit more about Microsoft Copilot. So with that, I said we wish you the best. Have an awesome day.